Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is August 12th, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure, real honor and a pleasure, let me say, to be here with Paul Levinson. Paul, where in the heck you calling in from?
Well, we helped our daughter buy a house on Cape Cod last year, and we're making good use of it. We're about 5 minutes from the beach. And for those folks who know Cape Cod, this is Brewster, Massachusetts. And the beach I'm talking about is the Ellis Landing Beach. I think it's the most beautiful place in the world, both to look at and jump in the water and walk on the beach. In fact, I just got back from a swim this afternoon, and the water is perfect. It cooled off. It was pretty hot here the last couple of days. So this actually, I have written at least half of everything that I've written at one point or another, floating in this water of Cape Cod Bay and just thinking about what I want to write. And as a matter of fact, one of the things about smartphones that I love is I can get back to the shore and basically write what I'm thinking about, not lose too much.
It's beautiful. You practically answered it. What's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being, wow. I mean, there are a lot. Physically, there are all kinds of wonderful things if you think about what gratifies our senses. Intellectually, though, the best thing for a human being is to do something that fulfills you, that makes you feel a part of the universe, a part of the cosmos. You're making a contribution. In a way, this gets back to Carl Sagan. I was always impressed by the way he talked about the relationship of human beings to the cosmos. We are part of the cosmos. And when you do something, when you come up with an idea, when you write something and it gets beyond you, it gets from your mind and brain out into the world, you are really in a small and sometimes larger way changing the nature of the cosmos. And to me, that's the most satisfying thing in the world.
Great answer, Paul. The next question is, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, I'll say something that will make me not very popular with most people in the academic world, and that's my favorite form of information is anything that's online that I can read, hear, or see. I am an unabashed advocate of the internet from the very first time I used it, and we can talk about this. I know that it's been used for very bad things, spreading conspiracy theories, and something does need to be done about that. But as far as a mode of human expression, and for me in particular, nothing beats the immediacy of both producing things, getting them out there, but also reading things, hearing things, seeing things. And as much as I love what I grew up with, which was a combination of reading a book, reading a newspaper, uh, going out to the movies, all those various things, watching television. I wrote a piece in 1982 called The Benefits of Watching Television. I
Yeah.
think it's good for you. And I still love all those modes, but nothing compares to this immediacy. The fact that anybody who's watching now, they could be any place in the world, and for better or worse, they're watching and listening to this conversation. That
Yeah.
is truly magical.
It's amazing. We're on live TV worldwide. We're not in New York with clunky big cameras or anything. It's quite amazing. So, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, because we understand intrinsically that the key to life itself, and not just human life, all life is communication. And we are intelligent enough to realize that and know that you need to learn, you need to understand what is dangerous, what is beneficial, what works, what doesn't work for you. And our greatest triumphs have come from the collection of information, and our greatest failures have come when we've not been sufficient in collecting information.
Beautiful. And is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
It's 100% innate. Uh, Because I think as soon as, and again, this is not just human beings, dogs are eager for information, cats, birds, you know, I suppose maybe a plant, all a plant is eager for is reaching for the sunlight. Even that's a form of information.
That
But
is.
yeah, but I think it is really innate. I think the human brain, and you can see this in babies, when they look up, when they recognize someone, they're hungry and they're thirsty for knowledge. And one of the problems with society is that it often punishes the quest for knowledge.
Yeah.
Even the school system, they like to, in the school system, they use the old fashioned model. We're going to, in effect, inject our students with knowledge. That's not the way to learn.
No.
What you need to do is elicit an active brain, an active mind that goes out
Yeah.
and deals with and therefore can understand the knowledge, not just
Yeah.
passively receive it.
Really well put. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
Exactly right. And this gets to an important McLuhan point, hot versus cool. Hot, basically, the information just washes over you. You get something out of it. But when the information is at all ambiguous or incomplete, which is in fact what all information is, until somebody tries to put a label on it, then your mind naturally reaches out to understand what's going on, to apprehend that information, to make sense of it, which really is putting it in the context of what you already know. This gets back to Plato and one of his great points that the very nature of knowledge is sort of paradoxical because the only way that we know something is if we already know it, right? If we have zero knowledge of the thing, and of course, we never have zero knowledge. We always have some knowledge. We're basically going to, not even understand what we're seeing. But once a child begins to develop, she or he has a certain amount of knowledge, and that's how they learn. They take in what's out there and they process it, compare it with what they already know, and they build up their knowledge system.
Yeah. But it's funny, I learned from Eric McLuhan that the word fake and the word fact both come from the Latin word to make. So you sort of touched on that. And indeed, I worded the question a little backwards. I want you to fill in the last word. I don't know what I think until I.
Think it.
Oh, that's what you said. Think it. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
that's okay.
Because, McLuhan said, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion said, I don't know what I think until I write it. So that's a perfect lead in. Can humans think without language?
Well, first of all, the two examples you put forward go beyond language, right? In other words, you can think and not say anything, but you're still using language. You can make a movie and not say a word, but there's a language involved. Obviously, I mean, the people who are making silent movies, I know there were words beneath that, but even without the words, those images on the screen were saying something. So, but here is the point. I don't know, and it's a fascinating question. I don't know if anyone knows which came first, uh, thought or language. I would assume that the two sort of co-evolved, but I am a great believer in, for the most part, although it is true that communicating, speaking, writing does generate thought, by and large, I think thought comes first. And and again, unfortunately or fortunately, most of what I say comes from a very Cartesian view, meaning I tend to believe that the way I process things is true for human beings in general, which could or could not be the case. I don't know how other human beings do it. But I just finished writing a novel, and I have to say, the way I write novels, I have like no idea what's going to happen beyond the words that I put out there. And at least for me, I'm constantly thinking about it all the time. And it is true, if I write something, that could give me an idea of where to go. But the thought process for me is primary.
Yeah. You evoke Lily Tomlin says reality's just a collective hunch. So Chomsky, you brought up Chomsky, and I'm glad because he says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Paul, what do you do when language breaks down? When language doesn't work, what do you do?
Well, that's a very serious problem. And we're experiencing this problem right now in the United States and, for that matter, around the world. Language is breaking down in the sense that, and not to get too political here, but Trump and his ardent supporters no longer care about the truth. Basically, they have now redefined the notion of truth to whatever they say, that's true. Everything else is false. In other words, they're changing the very meaning of the word. Uh, Prior to Trump, I hope, I assume, most people thought that, well, what truth is not what you say, it's what's out there in the world. And what you need to try to do is reflect what's out there in the world in what you say. So I think it's a very serious problem indeed, and you've pinpointed a large part of it. Language itself is breaking down. When Trump says anything that he sees on CNN or MSNBC, or I have no idea whether he reads the New York Times or the Washington Post, but anything his supporters read there that is at all critical of him and what he's still doing, that's fake news. Well, that basically is twisting. It's pretty clever. It's basically saying the falsity is in the truth that you are writing or speaking about me because I don't like it.
Yeah.
And that is a serious problem. I'll also add that even though, as I said, I love the internet, one of the serious problems of the internet and social media is that whereas truth used to be the primary motive of anything that people communicated in newspapers, in television news, in radio news, in documentary motion pictures, and so forth, what social media have done is they've replaced truth with the number of likes and shares as the ultimate motive. And there's a very good book called Post-Journalism, The Death of Newspapers by Andre Meir, and I would highly recommend it. One of the best books about media I've read in the past 40 years, and he really goes into detail on that. And that's part of the breakdown of language itself. I think that most human beings on our planet at this instant still intuitively know and accept that truth is what's out there and that we can try to understand.
You
But
know,
go ahead.
but
Well,
Paul, there's one amazing quote that I'd like to throw out there, and it's by Louis Buñuel, the great filmmaker. He says, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it." Now, 99.9% of people say that's great. And one person challenged me, and he goes, "That's bullshit. Because why are you going to seek something if you're not going to find it?" So my question is a flip of that in a way. Fourth step of the tetrad, push it to an extreme. It is the journey is more important than the destination. That's the cliche that turned into an archetype. Why do we have to seek or name a destination if the journey's more important?
because that's not true. The journey is not more important, and I'm with the person who says bullshit because the fact of the matter is, again, either I think there is such a thing as truth. I mean, I don't know why that would be a controversial thing. I'm looking out right out of my window right now. I see a tree. It happens to be an oak tree. That's the truth. It's not a maple tree. It's not a juniper tree. That's the truth. It's not a particularly exciting journey. It's not even a particularly exciting truth. But there are truths out there, and though the journey is fun, you know what that is doing? It's confusing sex with intellectual understanding. It is true that getting there with sex and the actual act, that's great. You know, it's
Yeah.
not just a conclusion. All of it is really good. You wouldn't want to have one without the other. But truth is a little different. Yeah, the journey is enjoyable, but the most satisfying thing is the obtaining of truth.
Yeah. No, that was really good. And you so much, you got ESP, so you so much anticipated a metaphor, learning, from McLuhan, create new metaphors that's coming up. But I'm going to stay in order of the script. Your observations of humans in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Well, again, this is a cop out on my part, but we're both. You can't
Yeah,
separate
yeah,
one
no,
from
that's
the
not a
other.
cop.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and the fact is, I mean, the only beings that are more thinking beings than feeling beings are androids and robots, and even they seem to have feelings. You know, certainly Data in Star
yeah,
Trek have feelings, and and the only organisms that feelings so dominate their thinking that feelings are so primary, they're not human. Again,
yeah,
dogs maybe
yeah.
are like that.
But Paul, again, it's amazing how you've anticipated each question, because I always say you can't separate feeling from thinking. It's not a cop out. We're both in probably equally, and it varies, but we invented the words thinking and feeling so we think we can separate them. In fact, Bridget Bardot said, "When I make love, I don't think." And I'm like, good luck. Like, how can you shut off your brain when you're doing the most physical, sensual thing? So here's where you anticipated two Alan Turing questions, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, that to answer that question, we have to get at what we mean by the soul. So I'll tell you what I think. First of all, the answer is yes, but because again, to think without whatever we mean by the soul, only a robot could do that. Human beings are
Yeah,
more than that. But what is the soul? And this is a fascinating question. There are some scientists, as you know, who say the soul is superfluous. You know, it's our brain. Stop giving me this metaphysical nonsense, this religious overlay. And I'm not a particularly religious person, but I do think that there is there actually are a series of questions that we don't understand and we may never be able to answer. Where did the universe come from? You know, the Big Bang is no answer because what caused the Big Bang? And in that sense, I am a religious person, and the human affinity for that, to those kinds of questions. You know, some questions eventually will be answered. We still don't know yet entirely how our kind of intelligent life emerged. You know, the difference between us and great apes and chimps, we have like over 98 point something percent identical DNA, but in that little 1 point whatever percent comes Mozart, Asimov, McLuhan, and you and I, and everyone who's watching and listening to this. And so, but I think ultimately that kind of question will answer. But the question of where did the universe come from, I don't
yeah,
know if we'll ever be able to answer that. And so that's why I'm comfortable. I'll accept the word soul, and
yeah.
by that word I mean an affinity, a sense that there is more to us than just what we see and hear, and even what our best science tells us. And so, to get back to your original question, uh, there is no human being who can think without, in some way, drawing on that soul. And
Beautiful. And you really evoked the great Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart were talking on the phone at the ends of their life, and they watched a PBS documentary on the Big Bang Theory. And Frank asked Don, he says, "What came before the Big Bang?" And Don said, "The big."
I thought he was going to say the Beatles because it almost begins like this. But yeah, that's good.
Okay, so the second Turing questions is can machines think?
No, and this is extremely important. What they do is not thinking. It, it appears on the surface that they're thinking, but it's a series of if-then programming
Yeah,
modules that are put in. And if you are sufficiently uh, good and advanced as a programmer, as a civilization, at present, it almost seems like Alexa is thinking,
yeah.
but that's not the case. I mean, if my car says to me, would you watch it? Be more careful when you're going over those potholes. You know, you're going to break my axle. I don't feel like spending the next day in a garage someplace. That's not the car thinking. That's just the car cleverly programmed. It seems like that. So, as far as I know, I think actually intelligence is a biological property.
Yeah,
If you want to see things that are the most similar to human intelligence, look in the natural world.
yeah.
And, again, whether it's orangutans or dolphins or whatever the most advanced non human biological organisms are, that's about the closest to thinking. The machines that we build, they're just really clever parrots. With all due respect to Marvin Minsky, the late Marvin Minsky, etc.
Yeah. Paul, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Well, again, I get such happiness from getting meaning
Yeah.
that I can't say I pursue. Look, I'll put it to you this way: a life without either would not be worth living. Uh, you need
Really,
both.
that's good. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
Well, both. We detect it certainly in others, and we're constantly looking for signs of it. But I think that when we wake up in the morning and become conscious after having been unconscious asleep, uh, you can almost feel when you're not fully awake, or at least I do,
Yeah.
the various components of consciousness coming into play. For example, and it depends on the day, and I'm sure you're the same way. There are times when I can wake up in the morning and sit down at my laptop and start writing away like a lunatic. I'm like thoroughly aware, whatever. There are other times I wake up and until I've had breakfast and a cup of tea, I'm okay, but I'm not thoroughly
Yeah.
there. So it depends on what else is going on. But yeah, I think that the brain definitely generates a sort of consciousness field that we call consciousness.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Absolutely, speed of thought. And I've said many times the fastest speed in the universe is the speed of imagination. I could
Wow.
imagine being, in a ship circling the Alpha Centauri sun right now. Not that hard, right? I could imagine being on Mars right now. But even if we could travel at the speed of light, it would take a tiny bit longer to get there.
Dude, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Well, it depends on, first of all, who the master is and who the person is who you want to understand the house. I've come to the conclusion a long time ago there are certain things that I'm not good at. I always like to say anything that I really enjoy as a consumer, I pretty soon after that begin thinking, well, how can I do that? So I grew up loving rock and roll music. by the early 1960s, I was in my own bands. I grew up loving science fiction. I became a science fiction author. I read McLuhan. I thought it was great. Shortly after that, I published my first article, et cetera, et cetera. And I often say it's a good thing I didn't have a love for nuclear physics. Otherwise, I would have tried to build something and blown up the world. I have no aptitude for that. I tend to be more of an acoustic person in general than a visual person. You know, I'm okay at drawing and stuff like that, but I understand things acoustically much better. McLuhan once said to me, by the way, that the reason why I was any good at all at understanding his stuff was because I was a musician. You know, so that
Nice.
yeah, my right brain kicked in there. So in terms of how, when you go into a house, there are certain houses that no matter what I did, no matter what instructions I was given, I'd be like a simpleton in the house, a complete fool. I wouldn't understand anything. A child would probably do better than I in that situation. I just don't have the aptitude for it. But in places in which I do have the aptitude, uh, just giving music as an example, the breakthrough for me in terms of going from listening and enjoying music to creating music was understanding how music is created. And I can tell you even more specifically, harmony. You hear like the Beatles, he's a real nowhere man. But I mean, there are three parts to that. And you hear that beautiful resonating harmony. And the way that I've come to understand and appreciate that is to know, in that case, it's three-part harmony, what notes each of the three Beatles are singing there. So that's, my answer to what you're saying. What tools do you need? You have to have the understanding, the aptitude for something, and a capacity to understand it, and then you can figure it out.
You know, I've done a lecture called McLuhan as Music. So that would be a good salon for us to do in the future. Beautiful, really well put. And there's a million things we could go into. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I'm an incurable optimist, and I still am. But I think that there is a rise and flow to democracy and fascism. I think that democracy is in a precarious position, and I don't think the most intelligent human being can't stand up to a bullet being fired at him or her. I think the cops are out of control to some extent. I mean, wherever you look, I don't know if you just heard, hey, someone rushed up. Salman Rushdie was giving a talk at Chautauqua in upstate New York. I don't know what condition he's in. He was stabbed in the neck. That just happened this
Ugh.
morning. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I think about and worry about. Not about me personally, but about
Yeah,
what's going to happen. And I think we need to make no mistake about it. There are a lot of people in the United States who are not as stupid as we would like them to be,
yeah,
who have a completely different point of view. They believe that what Trump is saying is true. They don't care about our conception of
no.
facts versus, falsity. And those people have always been here, but and again, this is one of the negative things of the internet. It's given them a voice, and I think we're going to get through this. If I had to bet, I would bet that,
Good.
but I think it's something everyone should be concerned about.
Yeah, McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. Paul, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
That's a great question. I don't know, because I think, okay, it's a combination. The answer to that is very similar to, I often pose the question, I still occasionally do, Why do people so savagely criticize McLuhan? And I've always answered it comes from one of several things, or maybe all of them. One, they're stupid. Uh, Two, they're lazy. Uh, Three, they can't be bothered. It's a series of questions. Four, they're jealous. I mean, there are all kinds of factors that come into that. But in terms of why we almost willfully want to be so numb to what media are doing, I think in the best possible light, it could be explained like this. We know, you and I know, and anyone who studied the media know that uh, originally, this is before the digital age, motion pictures were an illusion. Meaning, when you went to a movie theater and you saw an old-fashioned on celluloid motion picture, you were seeing a series of still photographs that were shown so quickly that our mind put them together into a continuous motion. And I think people intrinsically are worried that if they probe at all into what media are doing, it will spoil that illusion for
Yeah.
them. And this is even the case. You watch television, and someone is reporting the news. Again, it's a combination of laziness, but it's also you want to believe you enjoy the illusion that you're being told the
Yeah.
complete truth and nothing but the truth. You don't want to hear all the
Yeah.
mistakes that the reporter made. You don't want to hear how you're being manipulated by the where the camera is pointed. The camera's not taking in all of reality, it's pointing at a specific thing. Those things are a burden to many people, not to you and me. We enjoy, that's how we get our pleasure. But a lot of people, no, leave me
Yeah.
alone. And yet another example, I think food is a great, the study of food and understanding of food and eating is a great way of understanding even media. If you think about it, you go into a restaurant, you just want to eat a delicious meal. You don't want to see exactly how it's made, because that spoils some of the fun. You somehow want to think, oh, it just comes this way, even
Yeah.
though in many cases it's the result of the chef's brilliant mixing of this spice and that spice, and you cook it for this long. And again, the same thing is true with music. What I just said before, about the harmony. Most
Yeah.
people don't enjoy it that way. They just want the result. They don't want the basis.
They want to surrender to the experience, and that's not bad. Again, it has services and disservices. Do artists have moral obligation?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say, honestly, no. They,
Yay! No, I mean,
yeah,
here's Paul. Here's the evidence. It's
yeah,
evident everyone has moral
yeah,
obligation,
that's
and
right.
that's the easy. People want to say that, and I don't discourage people from saying that. But it is what I like is you feel certainty with your answers, but in the McLuhan world, it's suspended judgment, and it depends.
That's
But we still want to. So let's move on because there's a lot to cover.
Well,
Are you
let me just say one
Go
other
ahead.
thing.
Go
The
go go
only
ahead.
I think the artist has an obligation to please him or herself.
Yeah,
That's the only obligation. Nothing else matters ultimately.
yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'm not afraid of any ideas, honestly. I have never met an idea I'm afraid of. There are certain ideas I detest. I detest fascism because what fascism is conservatism. And if you don't like my view, we'll stick in violence. We'll
Right.
threaten you and kill you. So I'm not afraid of that. I detest that. I find
Yeah.
it interesting, but
Yeah.
and I wish it didn't exist, but I'm not afraid of any idea.
Paul, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yes, I can. When I was when I was 3 years old, um, two very significant things happened, and I remember both of them. One, we moved to a new apartment building, and I remember the smell of that new apartment building. I remember nothing of where we lived beforehand, but there was something about that smell that I remember. And then the other thing, and this is like just like a personal thing, and it's like a very wonderful thing. My uncle was in the army, and that's like a long story. The Korean War was going on, but luckily he got stationed in Germany, so he wasn't in any danger. It was in the 1950s. And also, when I was 3 years old, he came walking down my block, and I knew him. I mean, then I remembered him. I don't remember that earlier memory, but I knew him when I was 3 years old, and I was a little kid playing in front of my house, and he was walking down the block, and I ran to him, and he picked me up and hugged me. It was just a wonderful thing. It's like the first memory I also have of having missed somebody and then been rewarded at the end of that.
None like a hug. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Again, I'll betray my optimism. It's more of a blessing. I mean, there was something I would, like everyone else, not every experience in my life has been good, but I'm not a fan of amnesia or memory wiping or anything like that. In science fiction novels and movies, that's like one of the worst things you could do. All right, well, we'll wipe the memory, and that's right. That is, there was like a Star Trek episode, City on the Edge of Forever, where poor Kirk falls in love with somebody, and they don't want to remember. And there was a recent episode actually of the Orville of all things, which is, by the way, I highly recommend. Seth MacFarlane's sort of satire of Star Trek, but it has some very good shows. Anyway, in those shows and other science fiction as well, one of the worst things that can be done to someone is you erase their memory. And I would never want that to happen to me or to anyone that I cared about.
Paul, just briefly, tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
All right. Well, I'll tell you, in my family, my late father, he was an attorney. Um, and I'll tell you something that my father did, which I'm not an attorney, and he was disappointed I didn't become an attorney, but this had a very profound impact on me. And here's what my father did. My father would take cases, and he would often win the cases. And usually an attorney gets like a 33% fee based on the settlement. My father would lower the fee if he felt his client was in need of money. And my mother used to take issue with him. She said, "Marsh, what are you doing? We need the money too." My father said, "Yeah, I know, but I can't. I'm going to reduce the fee to 20%." And that really impressed me. I mean, there was like a certain inherent goodness in that. As far as someone who's not in my family, well, I'll tell you this, and this sounds to some extent trite. I've known and conversed with and done creative work with more than one really famous person. But I have to tell you, Marshall McLuhan was in a class by himself. And I'll tell you very briefly the way I met McLuhan, and we did work together for a couple of years. Neil Postman, one day I go into his office. I've told this story before, but I really love this story. Apropos of memory, I'd never want to lose my memory of this. One day I come into Neil Postman's office. He's sitting there smoking a cigarette, like sort of hanging out of his mouth. I said, "Neil, you okay?" Yeah, take a look at this. What do you think this? And he shoves across the desk. I was a doctoral student then. A folder. I open the folder, and there is a typed manuscript, "The Laws of the Media," by H. Marshall McLuhan. And I say, "Yeah, this is an article by McLuhan. What's the problem?" And Neil saying, "I don't know. I really can't. I can't quite understand what he's saying. Can you make any sense of it?" So I read it. That was an early draft of what became an article that was published in etc. And Neil asked me to write a preface or an introduction to the article, which I did. But I thought it was just for Neil's guidance. Without telling me, he sends it up to McLuhan, then tells me, that he sends it up. And as you can tell, I'm a pretty arrogant, self-confident person, and I was even more so back then. But the last thing that I wanted was to have. Look, a part of me was thrilled that he sent it up to McLuhan, but I was also a little worried. McLuhan's going to think, "Wow, this jackass wrote an introduction to my work." Anyway, the next thing I heard is McLuhan is coming to New York and would like to meet me for lunch, and that set off just a fantastic, couple of years. He had a brilliant sense of humor. He had
Yeah.
a twinkle in his eye. And I already knew that the intellectual life, the life of the academic was fun. But it was McLuhan who really showed that to me. He took such joy in everything that he did. I also always tell the story. One of the times I went up to see McLuhan, my wife and I had dinner. Corinne, McLuhan's wife, and McLuhan, we had this great dinner. Then we go back. We're staying at the Chelsea Hotel. It's like 10:30 at night, and the phone rings. I'm saying, who the hell knows that I'm even here? So, and who's on the phone? Hi, Paul Marshall here. I say, hey, how you doing? Are you watching the David Frost interview of Nixon? And I said, as a matter of fact, yeah. And McLuhan then proceeds to give me this great exegesis. I think Nixon's gotten much better. Too bad he didn't have that in 1960. He would have been debate. But he just took such joy in
Yeah.
constantly thinking about this.
No, it's beautiful, Paul, what you're saying, because the other story is really, I don't, like I said, let's save all the details, but the one I love is when you're at that big speaking engagement of Marshall, and you think they're going to praise Neil, and Marshall name drops you instead of Neil. That was classic.
I know.
So did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Well, look, here's the truth. And I'm Jewish by heritage, and my parents, like many other people their age that I knew and even still know, they were Jewish by heritage too, but neither one was especially
Yeah.
religious. And my mother, God bless her, used to make fun of my father because he was a little too religious for her. When they had an argument, my mother would say, "You go pray to your God, Morris. See if that gives you the right answer here." Anyhow, but
That's
so
good. Well, you brought it up. Do you pray?
no.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
That he, she, whoever God is, recognize the importance of what I've been doing and is glad that I did it and knows that I tried my best and, in fact, succeeded to some extent.
How beautiful. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
That's similar to the question of whether we generate consciousness, or
Yeah.
I think the answer again is both. I
Yeah.
think that there are some people who are intrinsically no good, who are
Yeah.
intrinsically evil. I mean, I can name three of them, and listeners can think about how they want to rank them:
Yeah.
Adolf Hitler, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump. Three human beings who are intrinsically no damn good. Um, but I do think that there are also people who get sucked into like evil modes, either
Yeah.
because they're weak or because they have evil tendencies. So that's why it's sort of both.
But here's the follow-up, Paul. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'm set up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is how do you, Paul, advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I disagree with that completely. I mean, I think a little. That might be true. This is actually a better answer. I don't disagree that maybe it empowers your enemy. But to not acknowledge your enemy is a far more dangerous thing. You need to know who your enemies are.
I get that reaction sometimes, but how in general, I know it's specific, how in general do you advise someone to deal with an enemy?
All right. Well, there are a variety of approaches. One approach is you destroy, you try to obliterate your enemy, and as a strategic approach, if you can do that, that's probably the safest approach because as long as your enemy continues, you might think you've convinced your enemy not to be your enemy. You've come to terms with your enemy, but if you're wrong, um, that could result in damage to you. But there is no way to obliterate totally an enemy. Um, I mean, the person could die. I'm certainly I wouldn't recommend killing anybody. I'm not a murderer. But the point is, the ideas of your enemy. This is an old cliche. Also, even if the person is gone, the ideas can well continue. So
Yeah.
here's the best way I think of dealing with an enemy is trying to understand what your enemy's attack on you is, where it's coming from. It is possible your enemy may be partially right. In my case, of course, never. No, I'm only kidding. But no, to the
Yeah.
extent that you can understand it, you can listen. This gets back to Karl Popper, who his idea that you can only learn when something is falsified. If you're wondering what the color of a swan is, and you see 1,000 white swans, then you see 100,000 white swans, you haven't learned anything more. You already knew all swans were white. As soon as you see a purple swan, that one purple swan falsifies that. So you then know all swans are not white. So enemies are valuable because they can get you to improve your ideas and your thinking.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, a world without enemies would be pretty boring. So
That's American Indians, indigenous say your enemy's your best teacher. But really, what you evoke by saying understand the attack. I learned this from a really young kid who studying jujitsu and judo. He says the great generals they know how to fight a fight, but they know how to not have the fight in the first place to avoid the battle. Now, James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin, and this one, again, you got ESP because you anticipated it with that oak metaphor looking out your window. Joyce said he started the first cinema in Dublin over 100 years ago. He says, this is stupid. He checked out. He says, why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Paul, why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
well, we can, but that wouldn't be as much fun. The good thing about these fictitious presentations is because they're not just a simple copy of what real life is. No fiction is like that. As I often tell my students, the most strictly produced and ethically put together documentary is still a form of fiction because they're making a decision to leave certain things out. So anything that you see on a screen, on a stage, that you read in a book, even if it's sold as nonfiction, and certainly something sold as fiction is much more so, it has elements in there that someone decided to rearrange things so that it becomes more interesting, more comprehensible. And that's why we need those things as well. What fiction does is it takes reality and it puts the elements of reality in such a constellation that they become not instantly, but certainly sooner rather than if we were just living life understandable. This novel that I just finished writing is based on a short story called It's Real Life. I won't go into the details of it except to say, like I'm sure many people in this world, every time I hear the Beatles sing "It's Real Love." It's real love. And of course, that was based on a demo that John Lennon did before he was assassinated. It was given to the three remaining Beatles by Yoko. I think she gave it to Paul McCartney. They went in, they did a beautiful job. Every time I hear that, it tugs on my heartstrings.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that I can do about it. And so what I decided to do is write something, and in a fictitious way, the lead character there is doing something about that.
It's beautiful. So basically, Paul, you're a writer and a professor and a lot more. I know, but let's just talk about those two, the tipping points. When you're growing up reading, you're doing TV, movies, all the stuff. When is the tipping point where you go, I want to be a writer? I'm going to pursue being a writer. What caused that tipping point and when was it?
Well, there are a couple of tipping points. One was in junior high school. I wrote a piece. It was not fiction. It was on Charles de Gaulle, and I remember, you know, de Gaulle had a big nose, and this was like a piece, like in a an international public relations class or something, international political relations class. And in this piece, I wrote something about the big nose. And again, I was just a kid. It was public school. The big nose of Charles de Gaulle doesn't disguise what's really going on in his head, or something like that. Who remembers? And I had a very good teacher who basically put like a nice big check mark next to it and said, "Good for you. This is like that's the way people should write." So that was like an early reinforcement that it was good as a writer to take chances. And the other part of your question was, I'm also a professor. When did I know I
Yeah. So
wanted?
what's the tipping point where
Yeah,
you said, I'm going to be a professor? Yeah.
yeah. Look, it's I'm sure crystal clear to you and everyone who's watching this. I love talking. I enjoy talking, and I was already. Let's see, I had started the doctoral program under Neil Postman at NYU, and I had some kind of part-time job actually it was like a service where I was like watching, believe it or not, television news programs and writing out transcripts of what they were said. And I was paid X amount of money for that. But I began thinking, oh, that was fun, but I wanted to do something different. And one day I walked into the NYU to have like an employment service for students. And I saw some, postings, and I see there's a job opening up at St. John's University to teach a course in creative journalism. Um, I had never taught a course before in my life. I had never set foot into a classroom before, but I knew I had one, slight thing up my sleeve. At that point, I had had 3 articles published in the Village Voice in the New York newspaper. And so I figured, what the hell? I'll go in. And I go in and God bless him, Jack Franzetti was the chair of the department. He's interviewing me. And I give him like my 1-page CV. And he says, well, I see you really haven't done any teaching. And I said, no, I haven't. But if you look on the page, you'll see I've had 3 articles published in the Village Voice. That's really a kind of creative journalism. And he looked at me and he said, boy, you have a lot of nerve, don't you? I said, yeah, but, he said, well, luckily for you, the professor was supposed to teach this course, just announced he was getting a job someplace else. The course starts next week. Apropos of your earlier question, I operate on my feelings. I have a feeling you would be a good professor. So I tell you what, I'm going to take a chance, go in and teach that course. And
Nice.
yeah, apropos of prayers, I said, okay, great. Just one thing I'm not sure of. St. John's is like a very religious school. I heard something, I have to say a prayer at the beginning of each class I teach. Said, no, that's nonsense. You only do that if you're a member of the order of the people here who are, on campus. You're a lay faculty member. You don't have to say any prayer or anything, just teach your class. That was my first class, 1976. I loved it. And the rest was downhill after that.
Well, I've seen you do some of these lectures online, and I would have loved to have you as a professor, and I still treat you as someone I can look up to and learn from. So this is in regard to your fiction writing. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're writing fiction, what role does intention play in your creative process?
By intention, do you mean what my intention is as the creator or the intention of a lead character?
Very good question. You know, I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer, as John Cage would say, but Paul, you win. That's what this series is all about. Inspired by Marshall. We're trying to invent new questions. You answered a question with a question. Yeah, you put it into the context you want. I would say
Okay.
both, but yeah,
All right.
any context you want. Yeah.
Okay. As far as the intention of the characters, a couple of things. One, you certainly don't want to make that too obvious. You know, the only fiction I've ever read that I think is worthwhile, and that's been many pieces of fiction, and the only fiction I've ever tried to write and have written are the reader. I want the reader to get really invested in the story, to internalize the story. And in the end, at the end, I think the intentions for the most part should be clear. However, there are exceptions even to that. You're familiar with The Lady or the Tiger. This is like
Oh, really good. Who wrote
yeah,
that?
uh,
Later,
Stockton, Frank R. Stockton.
that is
In
the
the
lady or the
18,
tiger.
yeah, and basically it ends. You don't know how it ends. So sometimes it can be good to basically leave the reader literally just cut off hanging there. And again, this would be McLuhan hot versus cool draws people in. But so that's the intention of the characters, what the characters are doing, why they're doing it. As far as my intention is concerned, first of all, to be crystal clear and totally honest, I often don't even know what my own
Yeah.
intentions are. Again, that's why I said earlier, my main intention is to delight myself. I'm a very egotistical person. If I write something and I really love it and you read it, you don't like it, my initial thought is there's something wrong with you, not me. So, um,
Paul, I love you for who you are because you don't back down. But let's go on because yeah, these stuff will come back around. Because you already answered this in a way, but Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. When you're writing fiction, how much are you thinking of your audience, your reader?
not really much at all.
Yeah,
I mean, and this, I know this sounds arrogant. I'm the only audience.
yeah.
I do most of the time let my wife read what I write, and I do take what she says seriously to some extent. I mean, certainly if she sees I misspelled a word or whatever.
Yeah.
But when it comes to plot points, more often than not, if she or anyone raises an objection to a plot point, I stick with what I want to. I'll tell you another true story. David Hartwell was my editor, the late David Hartwell at Tor Books, one of my main publishers. And in my first novel, The Silk Code, which won, by the way, the Locus Award for Best First Science Fiction Novel of 1999. Without giving too much away, there most of the story takes place in the present, but there is a part of the story that takes place in 700 AD, and there are 5 or 6 chapters in that story. Anyway, when I originally wrote that story, I had the novel. So the whole novel takes place in the present, and then I had like 2 or 3 chapters in the present, 1 chapter in 700 AD, 2, 3 chapters in the present, one chapter in 700 AD. Other writers have done that. That wasn't so original. But Hartwell tells me, I really love that 700 AD part, and you're basically frustrating the reader by separating that out. But I suggest you have a part 1 in the present, part 2, it all takes place in 700 AD, and then parts 3 and 4. I said, no, I don't really feel that way. But it was my first novel published, and he talked me into it. So you're not going to
Wow.
believe this, so maybe you will. one of the first reviews that comes out is, oh, it's a great novel, but what the hell is the matter with Levinson? He basically just goes off the deep end and like gives us like 5, 6 chapters that take place.
That is a great story. I got to ask you two quickie questions about sci-fi that always. Theodore Sturgeon's More Than Human. Do you know it well?
Pretty well.
You know, Phil Lesh from The Dead and Frank Zappa claim it's their biggest influence book. Just in a sentence or two, why? Why would that be such a big influence on these two huge music people?
Well, because again, to answer that question, let me actually get back again to my own
Oh,
situation.
sure.
Yeah, there is not a distinction between reading exciting, thrilling ideas and coming up with exciting, wonderful music. The two are part and parcel of the same thing. So everything that I've read, what does the Foundation trilogy have to do with my music? It might have something to do with my science fiction, but what that does, More Than Human, the Foundation trilogy, all of these great science fiction stories, is stimulate a part of the brain, which is exactly the same part of the brain that writes lyrics and music.
Yes, that's good. And then one other quickie is The Man Who Fell to Earth, not the movie, in the book. Are you well familiar with the book?
Yeah, and also we can talk about the television series.
Okay, no, I don't want to talk about that. I just want to ask you, in the book, does he specify the guys watching 18 TVs at once? Is that in the book, or is that only brought about by Nick Rogue in the movie?
I honestly don't remember.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
If it's fine. Let's move on. Here's this routine. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Rather than give you examples, knife and fork teeth, what does the writing utensil extend for you? What humanness, whether it's a keyboard or a pen, what humanness does the writing utensil extend for you?
My mind.
Okay. I got so many weird places to go. I know. What was the motive of the cave artist?
Oh, the motive of the cave artist is the motive of every artist who ever existed, to basically do something in the present which will extend into the future. That's what every artist is doing. And as a matter of fact, you probably know this. Photography, Andre Bazin, Bazin,
Yes.
said
Yeah.
that the camera and the photograph rescues an image from its proper corruption in time. And I always like that because that's not only true of the camera and the photographer, it's true of the artist and it's true of the cave painting artist. All of those efforts were attempting to rescue an image from its proper corruption in time. The nature of reality is an image only exists for a split second and then it changes. Yeah, and again, getting back to this tree, there's hardly any wind blowing now, but if I look carefully, there is a slight breeze blowing. So what I'm seeing this instant is not exactly the same as next instant. But if I were to paint that or take a photograph of it, then I'd be rescuing that image from its proper corruption in time.
What's more important, Paul, conviction or compromise?
Ah, okay. Again, you know that I'm being honest with you.
Oh, dude.
I may intellectually see the merit of compromise, but to be honest with you, I don't much like it. I'm not a worshiper of compromise. I would be I'd be the worst person in the world to hire as like an arbitrator. Two people are having a difficulty, seem to find a common ground. I'm not interested in common ground. I'm interested in what's right and what's wrong. And most of what I think is right. I'm not interested in compromising. I'll tell you another story which typifies this, one of my favorite stories. One of my first publications after I got my doctoral dissertation, accepted and I was teaching my first courses at Fairleigh Dickinson. Um, was an essay about the evolution of knowledge, and it was published. I was very happy. It was accepted for publication. I can't, by yeah, I do remember, by a journal called Knowledge. That was the name of the journal. So this was a long time ago in the 1980s. I'm thrilled it's going to be published. However, I get in the mail a manuscript that's my manuscript, but my God, like every other paragraph, it's like lit up with changes here and there. I'm not talking about mistakes that I made that are corrected. I'm talking about substituting a word for word that I have, shortening the sentence. So I basically call up the copy editor or the person who's maybe the chief editor at Sage Publications. Oh, hi, Dr. Levinson. So good to hear from you. How you doing? I said, not that good. I mean, you basically took my article. I see you dressed it up with all kinds of changes. Yeah, well, we think those are improvements. I said, well, I don't, and I'm the author. So look, if I have to, I'll withdraw the article and get it published elsewhere. I mean, this was like serious business. I don't want somebody. I'm not saying that that I'll reject everything that you said, but this is ridiculous. So she said, "All right, let me think." And so it was like a long pause. She said, "Okay, I have a solution. How about you pick out 50% of our changes that you can live with, and we'll go with that. And the other 50% will go with your changes. Isn't that fair? 50-50?" The editor says to me. I said, no, it's not fair. I'll tell you what's fair. I want 100% of what I wrote in the article. Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. You're obviously not a very fair person. I'll have to speak to the editor in chief to see if we can do this. I said, good, speak to the editor in chief. The article was published exactly as I sent it in. But
Nice. You held your ground.
that's
That is
right.
good. Okay, Paul, you've accomplished a lot. Rate these three elements in your accomplishments: luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Ambition by far is the biggest. What were the other two?
Skill and luck.
I would say ambition, skill, and luck. I've
Yeah.
had some luck. Luck is important, but I would say my skill is more important than my luck, and my ambition is what's kept me going from the instant I started this ride.
T.S. Eliot says poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Do you mean what language is it in terms of English versus French, or
No,
prose
I mean
versus poetry?
it's
Oh,
metaphorical. What form is your inner consciousness in? Is
okay.
the way I read it. If someone
Okay.
says English, I say what form? Yeah.
I got that. Yeah, that's a horrible answer. The answers, and I've sort of already hinted and even said this, it's in the form of a song. For me, everything that I do is musical,
Yeah.
even when I write nonfiction, but especially fiction.
Let's go into music for a second then, because let's do McLuhan as music someday. It would be a great salon. But I can interject two music questions right off the bat. My friend says the three T's of music: technique, theory, and taste. Technique, you learn how to do it. Theory, you know what chords. How does one acquire taste?
Okay, there are two answers to that. First of all, again, this is like another version of, is it innate or is it learned? And in
Invent
terms,
that.
yeah, in terms of taste, you have to have an innate taste. And it gets back again to Plato's point. You have to have an innate taste to know what's good and what's not good. But that can be developed and perfected. So it's a combination of both. It's basically your innate taste, and you expose your innate taste to all kinds of things, and you see and feel and hear what's good.
What's more fundamental, music or language?
Music is 100% more
Dude,
fundamental.
we're the
Yeah.
Zappa's mantra is music is the best. But two of my film heroes say this: ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self expression. In fact, Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. I know this stupid question and it's both, but it's all right. Whatever you think, say it. Is art making, book writing, music making more self expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology, culture, and environments are dominant?
Okay, it's not a hard question for me. It's 99 and 99 hundredths% self-expression. This stuff about being a vehicle, a conduit is pure bullshit. It it sounds so good. You know, people, oh God, it's not just me. I'm a conduit. Well, lucky me. You know, no, you are creating this stuff.
Well, I'll give you an example. There's three I give, but they're funny. But I love what you said, and I love how you hold your ground, and it's beautiful. Ginger Baker, the great drummer, says, "How'd you get your sound?" He says, "They were bombing me in London. So I heard this boom, 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 boom." That's where he got his sound. James Brown, drummer in Ohio. There's a factory on one side of his house and uh, a train on the other. So he invented funk drumming from, from these two sounds. But the best is more recent. Missy Elliott said she learned how to sing from listening to car alarms. So, anyways, really, Paul, the hidden question there is, can art making be egoless?
No, I don't see how it can be. In fact, I
What's
think it is an arch example. It's almost the epitome of egotism
yeah?
to create because it
What
takes that kind of confidence.
was Freud right?
About what he was
Yeah,
right
that's
about.
again.
Yeah,
That's
no.
what
Well,
people go. But I mean, just
here's
in general, you
well,
think
no,
Freud?
no, but yeah, let's get specific. Freud was well, he wasn't right about everything. You know, he put a great emphasis in libido and thanatos, love, life on the one hand, death on the other. I think he was 100% right about love and libido. There's nothing like libido. Look, there is an erotic energy, I think, in every creative act, and but I mean that more like in a Freudian sense than in a sleazy sense, although
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
Freud was sleazy. But I mean, everything that I write, all the music that I do, all the fiction, all the nonfiction, um, I want the people who read it to be erotically excited, as
No,
insane as
it's
that sounds.
beautiful.
Yeah.
It goes back to that other. I think I said it, but I have to repeat it if I did. Is the Bridge of Bardot? When I make love, I don't think. But the hidden question now, it's triple hidden, is can you forget to die?
Woo. Yes, you can. That's a great question because
That is a
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. And I've had like, you know, like everybody else my age, I've had a couple of encounters with like nasty illnesses.
yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I am operating under the illusion that I'm not even going to know about my death, and
Yeah,
and I'm just going to keep on working, going to keep
that's
on.
good.
You know, some of my colleagues have retired at Fordham University.
That's
I thought
good.
you're going to have to carry me out on a stretcher. You know, I'm going to keep teaching. They can't stand that because as a tenured professor, I get a pretty nice salary after all these years. So, hey, that's right. You're going to have to put up with that. I'm going to continue teaching. So,
Because it goes back to your word fun. You're
that's
yeah, have fun. I asked Eric, I said, summarize your life, your whole philosophy in one word after the word the. Like Joyce would be the wake, the shining, Kubrick, whatever. And Eric said the playground. And I says, what about your dad? And he goes, same, the playground. And it's
yeah,
such an amazing word because you got the ground in there. And
that's right.
is perception reality?
No, there is a reality out there. Perception is a reflection of that reality. And the way that we know that is you can have incorrect perceptions. And I want to tell you something. You know I seem like a person who has like a bottomless pit of self confidence. or a bottomless well. But I've made mistakes in my life because my perception was wrong. And I'll tell you one thing that I'm also, remember I said I'm good at some things, not good at others. One thing I'm not that good at, and I see it in the academic world and in other things, is judging people in terms of how well I'm going to be able to work with them. Without mentioning names, I fired my agent several years ago. I'll tell you briefly why. This is a good story too. I had, basically, the agent gets like 20% of my
Yeah.
income, and I had a deal with a publisher. I won't mention them either. Where the deal was, I got whatever it is, X amount of money for the hardcover, and then like about a third of that amount in addition when the soft cover comes out. The publisher did a terrible job promoting it. It wasn't my fault, of course, in any way. And so the hardcover didn't sell that well. A year goes by, I don't see the paperback out. I'm looking for my money. I call the publisher, what's going on? Well, look, your book didn't do that well. I said to the publisher, well, read the contract. All right, look, don't worry, just take it easy. We'll publish the software. We're not trying to avoid this. 2, 3 years go by. Finally, I begin speaking to my agent, who says to me, Paul, we are an agent. We can't antagonize a publisher. What do you expect us to do? Just take it easy also. Anyway, to make a long story short, another year or two goes by, still nothing. I run into online, another reason why I like the internet. My original editor at this publisher, I tell him what happens. He said, that's outrageous. I'm going to speak to the head of the company. You're going to get your softcover published. You're going to get your money. That's what happens. However, I'm still under contract to the agent. So the editor in chief says to me, okay, we're publishing it. The money's in the mail to you, but we have to send it to your agent. I said, okay, because that's what the contract is. I get a call from the agent. Hey, we got the money. I said, yeah, no thanks to you. So he says, oh, don't worry about it. I'm writing a check to you right now, and mentions an amount, and it's 20% less than the total amount. I said, are you telling me you have the nerve? You're going to take your 20%? You did nothing. You didn't want to call the publisher. What are you getting 20% for? From trying to discourage me from enforcing a contract that you negotiated? Anyway, so I fired that agent. But the point is, I was a poor judge of that person's
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah.
So perceptions and reality. The reality is that agent was not a person I should have been. And there were indications from the very beginning, but I chose not to pay attention to them. That's what the reality was. My perception was off.
Yeah. Paul, it's a joy and a pleasure talking to you because you're a great talker, but you're also a great listener. You listen to the questions. I really appreciate this. I'd love to do a salon on Neil Postman, and I have some things, and McLuhan's music. But just for today, we have about 10 more minutes. If you can go more than 10, because I asked for 90 today, but if you can go more than 10, I can gauge what to do.
I can go more than 10.
How much more minutes over 10 minutes can you go? Then
How about 45 minutes? So it's now like 6:15
yeah,
here.
you mean you can go 15 over. Yeah.
No, I can go 30 over, right?
Oh,
Because
you can go 30. You can go
yeah,
30 over?
yeah,
Oh, well, that's good. Then we can
yeah.
cover a lot. Okay.
Okay.
So McLuhan probed Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. And just off the top of your head, did you ever read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people, even just a little of it, any of it?
No,
Did you ever talk to Marshall about Finnegan's Wake?
no.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate it. Now, what McLuhan knew was that Joyce was talking about dreaming awake, that everyone has abilities to create scenarios in the middle of the night that are amazing. They're dreams. But artists, and not to be elitist, artists and other people can dream while they're awake. So, have dreams had an impact on you in your creative process?
Yes, but daydreams, not dreams, and there's a big
Ah,
difference. I love daydreaming. I daydream all the time. I daydream even when I'm driving, which I guess might not be the safest thing in the world. I grew up in New York City, And long before I was driving, I was taking the trains, and I would think about all kinds of things on the train all the time. So daydreaming to me is an absolutely essential part of my life and therefore my creative process. As far as more, conventional dreams, sometimes I wake up and remember something, and it could be relevant to something I'm working on, a story, but more often than that, that's not the case. And getting back to writing again, everything that I write is something that I've thought about before I write it. And by thinking about it, a large part of that is daydreaming about that. And that's the case of for nonfiction as well as fiction.
Yeah, because Tim Leary says that if you learn how to lucid dream, that when your body dies, your brain keeps working for 6 minutes and you can direct your path a little. Would you compare daydreaming to lucid dreaming? Do you know about that?
Yeah. I don't. I do know about lucid dreaming. I've never experienced it, so I can't really compare daydreaming to lucid dreaming.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Oh yeah, and I don't think they're impossible. For example, faster than light travel. I mean, this is a basic staple of science fiction. By the way, Einstein didn't think faster than light travel was impossible. He just thought it would do very weird things and like completely turn inside out the physical nature of the universe. But most physicists say no, we'll never travel faster than light. I think we probably will, and I think the only thing that I do think is impossible, which I also think about a lot, and I love writing about also, is time travel,
Yeah.
and that's because if you travel to the past and you change anything that you know about in the present, such as what you go back into the past to stop JFK from being assassinated, to use like an obvious cliche chestnut, well then how and you succeed. How did you know in the first place that John F. Kennedy was assassinated? And the
Right.
only answer to that is, well, at the instant you stopped the assassination, you created a new reality in which yourself in that reality didn't know that JFK was assassinated, et cetera, et cetera. You can get out of it. But to me, the logical entanglements, which are so much fun to write about, make that impossible in reality. But they're an enormous amount of fun to think about. And I love thinking about impossible things or things that are almost impossible.
Yeah, I love that word entanglements too. Yeah, the New Yorker quoted Sun Ra of all people, yeah, in the last couple months, and he said, "The impossible attracts me because everything possible has been done and the world didn't change." Tell me one major element of your creativeness that's changed and one major element that stayed the same in the years you've been engaged in being creative.
Well, what has definitely stayed the same is the stubborn adherence I have to myself as the best guide in what I'm doing, and the reticence I have to accept anyone else's suggestion. That's why I answered the way I did about compromise.
Yeah.
I love pure self-expression. That's stayed the same. Um, as far as what has changed, I would say this change happened a long time ago. Nothing has changed recently. But when I first started writing nonfiction, notwithstanding Charles de Gaulle and his big nose, that story, I by and large tried to write nonfiction in a very clear, straightforward way. And I saw a distinction between that and fiction. What became clear to me pretty much after I finished my doctoral dissertation, I began writing science fiction and also nonfiction, and they've gotten closer and continue to get closer to the point where right now at this instant, and for the last 15, 20, 30, 40 years, there is very little difference between my writing fiction and writing nonfiction. And I'll throw music into there as well. It all
That is amazing. That's so cool. It's like my friend told me, I said, the cover, and I love that you talk about the tetrad because so many McLuhanites, like, they sort of poo-poo the tetrad. The cover of the Global Village book that Marshall wrote with the CIA guy on the tetrad is not two Mobius strips. It's one Mobius strip. But you call it two, but it's one. I would say it's two. He said, no, it's two. I love that because that's like fiction and nonfiction. In this is fiction, this is nonfiction, but they're connected because you're one Mobius strip. Really good. But let's go back to stubborn for a second. Where do you think you got that, Paul? From the way your dad and mom raised you or on your own, that stubbornness?
Well, again, on my own, not the way
On your own?
on my own. I was born
Wow.
one stubborn son of a bitch. I continued that way. I mean, um, I've always been convinced of. I'm easily, effortlessly convinced of the logic of my own arguments.
Yeah.
It might be that I left something out. I can get things wrong, but throughout my now pretty long life, there have been, this gets back, to Karl Popper. There have been very few times that I've been refuted in terms of what I thought turned out not to be the case.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm not insinuating you are this, but I loved, Bleecker Bob, the guy who sold all the rare records to rock stars in New York. He was a great music guy. He would say, I'm not an asshole. I'm from New York. So he's like, it's like, because, if you're stubborn, it's sort of like, that's asshole. Okay, so this is perfect lead in because you've already tackled this. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Well, it's hard for me to identify anything like that because, at least in my self-perception, I've had these strengths all along. I guess.
Well, let me put it in McLuhan's terms. You've turned a breakdown into a breakthrough, or a rejection into a redirection. So it's any. You've sort of given some examples, but go ahead.
Yeah, there's probably more than one, but here's one that comes to mind because I get in touch with this all the time, and this is something that could be useful to any of our listeners and viewers. Knowing when to end or complete a creative project. When I was younger, I didn't know that as clearly as I know now. And so I think that was a weakness because it prevented me from finishing things which could have been finished and I could have gone on to the next thing. I think basically Winston Churchill gets credit for just about everything. So for all I know, he didn't say this, but he's often credited with this. A novel is never finished, it's only abandoned. And he wasn't talking about reading, he was talking about writing a novel. So, or maybe he was talking about books in general. And I think that's incredibly valuable advice. And it took writing my doctoral dissertation in the late 1970s for me to overcome that weakness. When I started writing it, I probably would still be writing it now if I hadn't overcome that weakness. By the way, here's the good advice Marshall gave me about when I first started writing my dissertation. I said, hey, Marshall, you've written a bunch of books. I've written some articles. Now I'm faced with writing a book. First time I've written a book, my dissertation. What's your best advice on this? And he said, your mistake is don't think of chapters as chapters. You've written a bunch of papers. Each chapter is a separate paper. And yeah, they should be related and connected, but you write enough papers, you'll have a book. And that was very helpful to me in terms of finishing my doctoral dissertation. Even with that advice, however, when I got to about halfway through the dissertation, and this is something that's never happened to me before, and this is the lesson that I learned, I put it aside. I remember saying, I don't think I'm going to be able to finish this. I poured my heart out. I've been working on this like a dog. It's still far from finished. And I went about 2, 3, 4 months without doing anything in the dissertation. And then one morning I got up and I saw a path forward. And that taught me a very important lesson. And I realized the reason why I thought I'd never finish it is I didn't see an ending. And I learned the lesson then you don't have to see an ending to keep writing and working. And, if you keep writing and working, the ending will suddenly suggest itself.
Really great stories. Because I thought you'd appreciate this one, turning a weakness into a strength. Iggy Pop said, "My band was so bad at imitating the Rolling Stones, we invented punk rock."
Oh, that's great. That's so cool.
And I mean, he didn't really, but also on the finishing, that's the whole history of my 4 feature films I'm making. And it's the first one's a remake of Orson Welles' The Other Side of the Wind before it came out, and we use that quote in our film. And the Picasso is in an art museum dressed up as a worker touching up one of his paintings, and the security guard goes, "Dude, you can't do that." And he goes, "I'm the artist," because oh, I thought I abandoned it, but now I still want to work on it. But knowing when to end, that is a really, yeah, creative project. Yeah, yeah. So anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When you are in control of it. Anger is dangerous when it's on top of you and you can feel it pulling you along. Um, if you can be on top of the anger and use it to channel an effective response at the object of your anger, then you're going to be fine. It's when it renders you out of control, or at least out of total control. Because
Yeah.
the problem there is it's not stupid to be angry at something or someone, but it's stupid. The anger itself is itself inchoate and verging on stupid and senseless. And that's why, whether in personal relationships or professional relationships, you do stupid things. And by the way, that's another answer. I'm a very volatile person in terms of weaknesses that I've learned to master. And, I get angry when people do things. Anyone who I see is interfering with what I want to do, my hackles are up. And I learned a long time ago the hard way that you accomplish far more. Let it simmer, and
Let
then
it
you can think about how to channel it.
that's a hard thing. And this sort of goes along with this. I'm going to explain the question and how it's changed. It's about satire. And knowing Marshall was a Manipian satirist, Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. So my question normally is, can satire be destructive? Now, of course, it can be destructive because if you do a cartoon in a certain country and they kill you, some people think dying is destructive. But my friend who wrote for Robin Williams, I said, can satire be destructive? And he says, that's the job of satire. So the question basically is, what is the function of satire? I mean, and you can go off on anything in that regard. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'll cite, of all people, Donald Trump. He's not the
Yeah.
only person who said this. I was interviewed, and I can't remember the guy's name, for a book about Donald Trump way back in 2004. And I don't know why the guy came by to interview me. And I said, well, one thing I always admired about Donald Trump is he really gets and lives the proposition that there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Yeah.
And, or another version of that is the worst publicity is no publicity, because
Yeah.
publicity always helps you. So there are some people who are embarrassed if it's satire of them. They don't like being made fun of. As far as I'm concerned, that principle that the worst publicity is no publicity. Um, Again, the Birdman of Alcatraz, he got great publicity because he was in prison for life. I wouldn't want that kind of publicity. So there are certain things that are not worth it, that are ethically abhorrent, and just not a good idea to do. But taking aside those things, certainly being made fun of publicly, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm the object of that, that's great. It's more publicity for me. I'm happy that people are talking about me. And by all means, give it a shot. Hey, if someone is thinking here of writing a satire of me, go for it. I'll give you my
Yeah.
blessing.
Steve Bannon has dropped McLuhan's name several times. And several years ago, he said, Trump is the most McLuhan-esque president. And I'm like, dude, every president is McLuhan-esque. I mean, you can apply McLuhan. So this goes along with the, okay, let's do this first. What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
I think women actually, in general, emotionally and intellectually, obviously there are exceptions on both sides. I think they're better human beings than men.
Wow.
Um, because I think, remember we were just talking a few minutes ago about channeling anger
Yeah.
and channeling aggression. I think women, I honestly think they're a slightly higher version of humanity insofar as they can they get angry just like men do, but they know how to deal with it for the most part. They're somehow more in touch with the interplay of all kinds of emotions and how that figures in human life. I think men get fixated on things more than women. Women, I think, in my experience, have been more understanding than men. Um, which is not to say professionally, I've had severe professional disagreements with women in all kinds of ways, both in terms of, my writing and other, professional activities as well, just as I've had disagreements with men. But although I love being a man and I wouldn't want to be a woman, I'm very happy being a man. I think that I think that women have like a certain special quality that men don't have.
No, well put. What caused matriarchy?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Probably in some societies, women had enough power to take advantage of the constant mistakes that the men in power did, and that's how that arose.
You know what Eric told me? I says, what caused matriarchy? And he says, men.
Well, that's right.
Because I think it's biology. It's the fact the woman gives birth that is, anyways, onward.
Well, let me just
This,
say one thing about women giving birth. I mean, the whole process of getting pregnant and, gestation and giving birth. I mean, that's something that no man can have. And right there and then you can see the difference between the two genders. And it would be very surprising if that didn't lead to very significant differences, between them. And I think the differences are in favor of the woman. And this probably gets Freudian in a superficial way, but I think every man is on some level motivated by that, aware of that. That could be, and here I'm just playing amateur psychologist. Men might be sometimes so obsessed and fanatical about achieving success in their career because they're missing that process that women naturally have.
Paul, this is so cool. I'm surprised we haven't talked in the past. It's really a pleasure. But I got to throw out this one theory that I've heard. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with it. The word mafia starts with the letters MA because women run the world, but they let men think they run the world. This woman in This
Yeah,
woman in our reading group went, shh, don't tell people
yeah.
that.
Well, this is James Brown. It's a man's world.
No,
It's a
yeah,
man, but it won't be nothing without a woman or a girl.
that is,
Yeah.
dude, I am so, James Brown is Godhead to me. So anybody who quotes James Brown, listen to this James Brown line. I've got a move that tells me what to do.
Oh yeah, that is brilliant.
That is
That is
unbelievable.
brilliant.
People don't think of him as a lyricist. That's
Yeah,
as good as Cole Porter or
it
the Irving
is.
Millet. That is so concise.
Yeah,
A move tells you what to do. Oh
yeah.
my God. There's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. Thank God I'm an atheist. So it's a lot of thoughts, but the basic line I want you to react to is not you create what you resist, but one creates what one resists. Just in general, that thing, you create what you resist. What do you think of that line, that thought?
I think I probably disagree with it because to me, and again, obviously this is based on what I have experienced and what I feel is the case. It seems to me that what I create is what I already love
Yeah.
and want to possess as my own. So all the things that I've done in my life, I came out with an album in 1972, Twice Upon a Rhyme, wrote all the lyrics and some of the music to it. My brain strategy was to wait like almost 50 years to come out with my second album. That's what I did, 2020, Welcome Up. But the things that I write about and sing about and play about on my album are not things that I was resisting. It was things that I wanted.
Yeah.
And the same is true with writing, and the same is true with teaching.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the only way that makes sense is that somebody, and this fortunately is not me. Let's say someone is addicted to heroin, so they they resist it, and yet they love it and they want to get on top of it. But
Yeah.
I don't think I'm addicted to any of these things.
Yeah.
So to me, the things that I resist. Okay, here's something I resist. Obviously, the older you get, the less exercise you're able to get, the less effective the exercise is. I try to go walking or swimming at least once a day. But what that means is obviously you have to be a little more careful about what you eat. You can't
Yeah.
stuff your face with candy, ice cream, all that stuff. So, yeah, I still like that. And I resist that. But I don't see any equation between that and that's what I'm creating.
Yeah. No, that's good. You handle well. How do you find peace of mind?
Okay, well, there are two ways, two very different ways. First of all, there's a way that I have complete, more or less, control over, and that's doing, including starting, conducting, and finishing what I want to do, whether teaching a class, teaching a course, writing a novel, writing a song. The other way is that there are people in the world I care about, my grandchildren, my wife, my children, close friends. And I find satisfaction and peace of mind in two ways. One, when I know that they're happy and doing okay, that brings me great peace of mind. And second, if I can do something to make them better, that makes me feel good and gives me peace of mind. And conversely, I don't have peace of mind when I'm worried about them.
How many years you been with your wife?
Wow, I've lost track. We got married in 1976. We started going out in 1968.
Wow. How do you explain the longevity?
Well, I always tell people, I'm the kind of person I would always amuse the people like in the school cafe because I would order the same thing for lunch every day. And sooner or later, someone behind the counter would say, "Hey, Professor Levinson, you're ordering the same thing every day." And what I usually tell her or him is, I say, as I tell my wife, when I find something I really like, I stick with it. And
Yeah,
so that's why.
good. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say have even more confidence than you have. I have plenty of confidence. You're going to make it. Don't tolerate anybody who gets in your way. Be absolutely ruthless in the pursuit of what you think is worthy and good, and learn to better recognize and differentiate friends and allies from people who are not that.
Well done. 5 quick Alan Watts questions, really brief, just off the top of your head in a few words. Who started it all?
Isaac Asimov.
Are we going to make it?
Yes.
Where do we put it?
Ah, in a book.
That is a great answer. Who's cleaning it up?
Not me.
Is it serious?
Yes.
Wow. Well, we got about 15 more minutes. This has been amazing, Paul. Again, I can't figure out why we haven't. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
He did it his way.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Lilac.
Oh, that's good. They want to have a color of ink other than black on some of the pages. What color?
The kind of purple that looks like the skin of a plum.
I like purple. That's good. My last name means purple. Okay, if a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Well, made of something that's durable and can last forever. And hey, I'm a New Yorker, not right next to the Statue of Liberty, but put it somewhere in New York Harbor so everybody in the city can see it.
Beautiful. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
All right. Well, this is a slightly, politically loaded question, but nonetheless, since you asked the question, I've not been to certain parts of the earth. I would like to. I'd like to go, for example, to Moscow, to Russia. My grandmother came from Russia, but I'm never going to go there. Certainly
It's
not.
good. It's good. You never had it and you never want. That's people think that's too Zen Cohen of a question. That's a good answer to go to Moscow. That works. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I refuse to answer that question. It's too revolting.
That is good. I love that answer. Okay, these are some bonus questions that I don't always get to ask people. Louis Leo Bersani studied Mallarmé, the great symbolist poet who had a big influence on Marshall. Leo said, the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. What does that mean to you? Not you
Yes.
you using it, but just in
Yeah.
general, what does it mean, and any thoughts on that?
because all creativity does come from pain. There's pain in creativity, and because creation is not easy. It could be like the most wonderful thing in the world, but it's not something you can instantly snap your fingers and get. So whether you're writing poetry or music or science fiction or nonfiction, there's pain in that process, and you know, overcoming it brings great joy. Let me just say, by the way, that as long as you bring up Mallarmé, Stefan Mallarmé, I've always had an affinity for the Impressionistic era, both in poetry, in music, Claude Debussy, Afternoon of Fawn, and painting. And I'd recommend to any of our listeners, I have a novelette called Marilyn and Monet. Marilyn is Marilyn Monroe, Monet is Claude Monet, and the two have a relationship, even though they didn't live in each other's time in that story. So that expressed one of my loves for Impressionism.
Beautiful. We should make a short movie of that. I have to tell you this, my friend, he was a Canadian folk singer, and then he hung out with Steve McQueen and all the Hollywood people in the 60s. One day he was in a little town outside of LA, and he was a motorcycle driver, and he pulled up to this hotel, and Marilyn Monroe was shooting a movie, and she just walked out of the hotel, got on the back of his motorcycle, and says, "How about a ride?"
Oh man.
So he had Marilyn Monroe clutched to his body for like whatever, 10 or 15 minutes, pulled back up, and she goes, "Thank you." And it's like, what? It's like maybe even more important if then you got to know her just to have that. But
I love it.
it's even better just to recall it, to
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that
yeah.
it happened. So here's a question, and what I love about Marshall is that the questions were important. And he said, let's invent new questions. In doing interviews, it's like I just have this script of questions, but this is so fun because it is a question he asked. And I'm asking you to explain it. You don't even have to answer it, but anyway, he said, how about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? So he's basically saying, here's art, here's technology, here's conscious, and here's consciousness. What is he basically saying in that question? And I'll repeat it if you want.
Yeah, no, I think I got it.
Okay, go ahead.
He's saying art is aware of technology, and so the the human beings create both. That the technology is the primary creation, but art comes after technology, looks at technology, puts it in context, and helps us understand it. By
Yeah.
the way, apropos of questions and answers, one of my now cliche points, and I always tell my students this, but I think it's true. There are no such thing as stupid answers to questions. There are
Yeah.
stupid questions, but not stupid answers to questions.
That's
An,
good.
an answer always has value.
That is good because I always say Finnegan's Wake it's up there with Take Today, The Executive's Dropout is the greatest books ever written. But really, what wipes them out is Mad Magazine's Alfred E. Newman. Snappy answers to stupid questions.
Here's one of my favorite little cartoons from Mad Magazine. It's a block. It looks like it comes from a block in the Bronx where I grew up. And at the beginning of a block, there's a pizza place, and it says best pizza in the city. And there's hardly anybody going into that pizza place. Next to it is best pizza in the country. There are a couple of people going in. The third place, pizza place, best pizza place in the world. You think it would be mobbed. There are a few more people than that. But then the fourth place is like totally mobbed. And it says best pizza on this block.
But I got to go back. I wrote my note wrong. There's no stupid questions or there's no stupid answers.
No stupid answers. There's no such
Oh,
thing
no
as a
stupid
right.
answers.
A
Yeah.
professor asks a question. There's no such thing as a stupid answer. If there's something stupid there, it's the professor's question is stupid, not the student's answer.
Yeah. Thank God, because I don't want to get my notes wrong. And it goes back to Alfred E. Newman. He says, the English language is the only language where a double negative is a no-no.
That's good. There's also a guy, I can't remember his name. He was a professor of philosophy at Columbia University. It'll come to me. Basically, an anecdote, which was probably true. He was at a conference, and somebody was making a point that in philosophy, all you can do is make a negative worse. You can't change the nature of a negative. In contrast to a positive thing, you can say yes or yes, yes. And yes, really, that makes it more positive. Oh, Morgan Besser, Sidney Morgan Besser was the professor. So Morgan Besser raises his hand and says, you want to know what I think about what you just said? The professor on the stage says, yeah. And he said, what do I think of your proposition? No, no. So he proved right there that you can basically repeat a negative and make it even worse.
Double negative, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul, we got 3 more and we're out of here. Truly fun and really appreciate it. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
More people of all ages are interested in these issues that we've been talking about. It's a slow process. It took a long time. McLuhan's ideas will never die. They'll be talked about 100, 1,000 years from now. We just, at the very beginning, we mentioned Ezra Klein. Here it is, 2022. About 2 months after McLuhan died, I knew an editor at St. Martin's Press, and I said, hey, I want to write a book about Marshall McLuhan. He said, Paul, listen, don't waste your time on that. You're a young scholar. Write about something else. McLuhan is history. He's no longer with us. So I went ahead and I wrote Digital McLuhan. That was published, in 1999, my best-selling book. Even people then would say, oh my God, it's amazing. People are still talking about McLuhan. I said, yeah, wake up. They're going to keep talking. I made this point about the Beatles back in the 1970s. I said, the Beatles are going to be as well known 1,000 years from now as Shakespeare is. Yeah. No. Yeah. So
I love that. I met this professor once and I said, what do you think of McLuhan? And then for an hour, he told me how McLuhan's not important. It's like, well, you just talked an hour about him. Okay. Thornton Wilder, a big Finnegan's Wake fan, in 1928, he said, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Paul, you laid your cards on the table for over 2 hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
That's a good answer because you don't want to make it too easy. That's what the hide it is. You don't want to write something that's so obvious. It would not be intriguing if that was the case. But yes, I do think every single thing that I write, and I assume everything that other people do and create, whether they're making films or whatever, they are exposing something of their inner self. And in that sense, if they didn't write it, it would be kept secret. So that is a good point. But you want to present it. The presentation shouldn't be just, here's a plate of food right in front of you, eat. It should be, you reach out, you get involved in this and that, and that's how you get the most out of it.
But Billy Wilder, what's your reaction to his line? Make the subtleties obvious.
Well, I think that I would interpret that as it's good to be subtle, but make sure it's not so subtle that people miss it completely. In other
Yeah.
words, what somebody likes is decoding a subtlety, but they have to know that it's there. If it's so subtle and people miss it, what good is it?
Yeah.
So, by the way, Billy Wilder, we know where your children are.
He he's a master. I love this one too. He said, "I'm only worried that they like my movie as much as they like the popcorn."
Well, he's right about that too. Over the
That's
years, I've
it.
seen many a
That's what
movie not as good as the popcorn for sure.
yeah, well, that's Marshall. I used to
Yeah,
ask this question all the time. There's no such thing as a good or bad movie. It's a good or bad viewing experience.
yeah.
And then people will go, "No, there's bad movies," but they know you can go to a bad movie and have a great viewing experience.
That's right. And conversely, you can go to a great movie and have a bad experience. Over the years, I mean, one of the things I'm glad about COVID, we haven't gone to a theater that often, but over the years, I can't tell you how many times we're watching some kind of movie where there's some kind of suspense, and there's like a couple sitting behind us who already saw the movie, and they give us like a libretto. All right, oh, there he is, the killer. You shut your mouth. I'm trying to.
Okay, last question. I hope this never ends, Paul. It's been fun. What gives you the most optimism?
That a variety of things, but they all amount to the same thing. That it seems to me that creativity, the output of wonderful things, has never been better. The form of it changes. We haven't really talked about this, but I'm sure you're aware. Streaming television. Science fiction obviously is my favorite genre of fiction. Second is mystery. I've watched more in terms of quantity and better movies and television series in the last couple of years on, whether it's Apple TV Plus, Amazon Prime Video, Paramount Plus, et cetera, HBO Max. And that gives me hope. I mean, because
Yeah.
all of that are people creating this outpouring. By the way, what I'll do is I'll send you a copy of Marilyn and Monet. So you
Oh,
can
I
read it.
love it. We should definitely make a movie of it. But it's funny because I just want to tell you the structure of the interview is what's the best thing for a human being is the first question. I got that from someone who studied Wilhelm Reich. He says the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question, what gives you the most optimism, is what's they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he says, what gives you the most optimism? He says, other people. So it's amazing because you really stress this, instill in doing something that fulfills yourself, and that always going to be involved other people in this creativity. You said at the end, optimism is always involves other people. So, I think Marshall really nailed it when he said communication of the new is a miracle, but it's not impossible. So I really feel that as two humans, I at least learned a lot of newness. There's newness that happens. So I'm really grateful, Paul, and it's really been fun. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends. We can keep the conversation going.
We will. And so your viewers should know, and don't get too frustrated. Jerry and I are going to keep talking for another couple of hours, but you're not going to see any of it.
No, actually, not at this time, because I have to go take my bike ride because my legs are like in need of movement. But really, Paul, I really hope we can do a salon on one on Postman and one on McLuhan as music, and another one on sci-fi would be great too. Because
We'll
that
do all
great
that.
line, yeah, that great line that Marshall said to his mom, that the characters in his first book were science fiction characters. That's an amazing line
I
to
know.
think.
Well, okay, I have two very quick things to tell you then.
Please.
One about Marshall. When Julian James, The Breakdown of Consciousness and the Bicameral Mind first was published, I was talking to Marshall. I said, what do you think of that book? Marshall looks at me and says, it's science fiction. But he meant it as a compliment. And then here's what I'll say about Neil Postman, and we can definitely talk an hour or longer about this. And this is true. Neil Postman was at once both of these things. The best teacher I ever had in my life, but someone that had ideas that I disagreed with almost 100%.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's good.
yeah,
That's a balance. But I
yeah,
love that because you know, you could even join us. We have an amazing group. So, I've been reading Finnegan's Wake with groups of people for years, but one of these people through the Zoom world said, "Well, why don't we read a McLuhan book out loud as a group in a Zoom meeting?" And I goes, "Well, I've been wanting to do that for years, but I never did it." So he says, "Well, okay, what do you want to read?" And he goes, "Laws of Media." I goes, "Laws of Media?" I says, "That's amazing." So we've had a Laws of Media reading group for about a year. Clinton's in it. It's amazing. And it is like for you to, and one of our guys is totally Julian Jane's out. So I can't wait to tell him. Marshall called it science fiction as a compliment.
yeah. And the way he said it's science fiction, if somebody were listening to that, they would say, "Oh, I guess Steve McLuhan didn't have much confidence in James's reasoning." But when you see his face, with his eyes lit up, science
Yeah.
fiction. It's like,
And you realize when he called Laws of Media the new science, that just
that's
like
right.
it's like Marshall's a poet. And people think he's a media theorist. No, he's a poet. And I think Donald Thiel nailed it. He said Marshall teased us to believe his percepts were concepts.
Yeah,
He
yeah, that's right.
teased us,
That's
you
right.
know, because if he read the Wikipedia entry and it says Marshall McLuhan, media theorist, he'd go, "Yeah, leave it.
No,
I'm not a theorist,
oh, I
but
know.
you
I
know."
know. Well, yeah, the whole thing about the logic boys, as I told you, he said to me at some point, you seem like a logic boy, but you get it. And that's only because you're a musician also.
That
It's like,
is so beautiful.
yeah.
All right,
All
Paul.
right.
Thanks again.
All
I'll
right.
hit
We'll be in touch.
broadcasting, but yeah,
Okay.
onward